Hello, good morning, and welcome to another episode of PSYCHED. I'm your host, Sule E. Joseph, a counseling psychologist by profession. Today's program is a sobering one. Today we look at a topic that does not necessarily speak to me personally, but speaks to a lot of my clients, particularly the male ones. What am I talking about? We're talking about parental alienation. Before we delve into today's topic and look at it from all aspects, it's my favorite topic or segment, Psyched to Know.
Psyched to Know, brought to you by Sule Joseph and Associates.
In the United States, 47% of moderately to severely alienated parents have contemplated suicide within the past year. According to local researchers, this vast majority of alienated parents are single fathers.
On the next episode of We Comedy Jam.
I'm married, by the way. I've been married for a while. He's a fair-skinned guy. You know, he's not technically white, but I didn't know that when we started dating. I thought I was getting into the 1%. But no!
You would not believe what this young lady doing. She is sleeping on my shoulder. So I did what any other gentleman would do, because I'm a gentleman. I said, hey, what are you doing? If you want a comfortable rest, you should lay on my lap, you know what I mean?
We Comedy Jam, Mondays at 8 p.m. only on WESN Content Capital.
Burning questions, urgent topics. Welcome back to One on One, the show where we tackle the most current and pertinent subjects that are affecting all citizens, where we ask the hard questions and have in-depth conversations. What separates One on One from other talk shows is that the conversation stems from a younger perspective on topics that affect the fabric of our society. One on One, Wednesdays at 10 a.m. on WESN Content Capital.
If you live with someone who's tested positive for COVID-19 and has to self-isolate at home, take care of them from a distance and reduce their movement around the house. Give them space, a designated space, and open those windows. If you have to be in contact, mask up, both of you. If you work, stay home from work and don't go out, not even to the grocery or pharmacy. And remember, no visitors allowed. Limit the contact to limit the spread.
The Trinidad and Tobago Red Cross Society. Mission-based, people-focused, community-driven.
Welcome back. When we left at the break, we spoke about we talked about the topic of the day, parental alienation. Before we get into that topic, we have to understand what that is. It sounds like a very technical term. Let's take in this video and get a better understanding of what parental alienation is really about.
It's something that people talk about a lot, but nobody has actually defined it. It's quite easy for people to say, I'm being alienated, when they don't think they're seeing their child enough. But actually, really what comes under alienation is it's more a consistent campaign by one parent to eliminate the other parent from the child's life and to really erode their relationship with them, mainly by psychologically manipulating the child.
6 symptoms of parental alienation. 1. Denigration is when the child repeatedly complains about the parent over and over again. Lack of ambivalence. Children have a lack of ambivalence, meaning they see one parent as totally good. Automatic support. Regardless of the topic that comes up, the child will automatically side with the preferred parent and automatically disagree with the targeted parents. 4. Absence of guilt. Children can be very disrespectful and say and do horrible things with absolutely no qualms of guilt. Borrowed scenarios. Borrowed scenarios refers to is when a child tells a story about an event and their story is exactly the same as their preferred parent has described. 6. Spread of animosity. If the father is the targeted parent, the child cuts all of the father's family members out of their lives, aunts, uncles, and grandparents. These relatives have done nothing wrong. The child will suddenly hate them and never want to see them because of their connection to the father.
Early on in my professional career, I worked in family court, and this was an issue that we witnessed quite often, or we had rather parents complaining about this issue quite often. Joining me today to have a conversation about this enigma of an issue is Ms. Lacan. Ms. Lacan is a certified mediator with the Mediation Board of Trinidad and Tobago, and she's an arbitrator with the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators in the United Kingdom. Ms. Lacan also has specialized training in family mediation. She has also been an advocate for victims of domestic violence. In her legal practice, Ms. Lacan has interacted with and represented victims, both adults and children, who suffered from severe emotional, psychological, financial, and physical abuse. And she has worked with a team of professionals to guide these individuals through the court system to either obtain protection orders, spousal or child support, matrimonial home orders, and other injunctive relief to protect their overall interests and well-being. Making time for us this morning is Ms. Lacan. Good morning, and thank you for being with us.
Good morning to you.
Good morning, Ms. Lacan. Thank you very much for being with us here this morning.
A pleasure.
All right, so we just looked at a video, and I can say professionally, I remember specifically having several clients who would complain regularly, and more so males, by the way, complain regularly of being cut out of their children's lives once there was a divorce or separation, or the relationship fell apart and separated, that they felt as though they were being kept away from their children. And not just kept away from their children, but made to feel as though they were crazy for demanding or feeling as though their children were now turning against them. All right? So tell us, is this concept of parental alienation real in your experience?
It's actually quite popular. It's still very much happening in Trinidad and Tobago. I think there's an increase in cases that I have had in private practice as an attorney at law, where parents complain that their child or their children are being alienated from them. I also personally found that in most cases, the parent who is doing the alienation is the mothers and not the fathers. But it happens on both ends, where either a mother or a father may do so. And in most instances, it's due to the breakdown of their marriage or their relationship. So the courts have, I realized recently that the courts have become not just familiar with it, but there are a number of judgments coming out of our local system which treats with parental alienation. And we also have some social workers and psychologists providing reports now which guides the court when they make a finding with respect to parental alienation. Okay,
excellent. It reminds me actually very much of a matter that I am currently involved with as a psychologist. Of course, I can't discuss the matter on air as it is currently before court and so on, but it really does speak to the child, because the child here is the pawn in this particular scenario or instance. The child is the one who's being manipulated.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah.
And there's findings by the court in particular that parental alienation with respect to children, it's a form of emotional abuse.
Yes.
And what most courts would do if there's a finding of parental alienation is refer the children or the child to a psychologist to sort of bridge the gap between that child and the parent who has been alienated. And if you wish, I have one particular case that provides guidance on the issue of parental alienation. I found this case helpful as to the options that the court would exercise or they consider when a finding is made. Now, of course, I would say before a finding is made of parental alienation, a court would look at experts. So they would consider the findings of a psychologist after interviews are done with the parent or the parents and the child and any third parties. What I would say as a con is in the system, because there are pros and cons, is that many of our psychologists and psychiatrists may not have the appropriate training to make these findings, especially when it relates to children, or they may not have had that sort of experience. Because some psychologists may, for example, work primarily with adults or prison inmates. They may have different spectrums or specializations,
Right.
just like an attorney at law may have different specializations. So there are cases where you would have parental alienation happening, but it may fall through the cracks when a psychologist interview the parties and give a report to the court, even though there are complaints before the court by a parent stating, well, my child is being alienated from me. Fortunately, in this particular case, ABC versus ABCD, the parties' names were kept out of the judgment. It was a decision done by the Honorable Madam Justice Lambert Peterson. And in that case, this child had nothing good to say about his mother. He blocked her from social media. When interviewed, he claimed that his mother physically abused him. And in many of these cases, sometimes the child would believe the stories given to him or her that they're being abused, and they would repeat it and then they believe it to be true.
Right.
And he also stated that he wanted to have no communication with his mother. So there was, of course, social services reports, interviews, psychologists, counseling, etc. And what the judge found is that this child had nothing good to say about his mother. If, when asked, can you actually tell us one good thing? He said, well, the one time, I got along with her is when she gave me some money. And the judge found that it was a form of emotional abuse on children, and that it is not in the interest of the child to be subjected to continued alienation. Now, our courts followed a lot of the Canadian cases because the Canadian courts has a lot of authority on how they treat with parental alienation.
Well, I was
They
going
had
to
a lot
ask
of
you that
experts
actually.
and psychologists
I
in
was going
their
to ask you
courts
about our laws.
that guided them in terms of how to treat with these cases. And in particular, we looked at a Canadian expert by the name of Dr. Barbara Fielder. And she was an expert in parental alienation, and she confirmed that a child could reject or resist contact with a parent for many reasons. And one reason may be as a result of alienation, where a child comes to share the favored parent's negative view of the other parent. And the rejection is not justified and it's disproportionate to the rejection which occurs. So sometimes they may say, well, I hate you and I don't want to speak to you again because I heard you're a bad person in court. It may, with younger children, it would be disproportionate. So at some point, the child had a very reasonable or good relationship with the other parent. So locally, for example, you may hear parents telling you, well, I had a good relationship with my son or my daughter, and this child refuses to speak to me. And in many instances, if it's left unchecked by the courts or it's left unchecked on the whole for a lengthy period of time, those views of the child is very hard to change. It becomes almost permanent. And if the child gets older, sometimes in many instances, the child or the children, as the case may be, may not have a relationship with that parent for life. So the experts acknowledge in this particular Canadian case that was used locally, that even if a favored parent has not done anything to instill a negative view of the other parent, It is important to know what steps the favored parent has taken to overcome the child's distorted belief and what has that parent done to repair the situation. So in many instances, when you have divorces or a separation in a cohabitational relationship or common law relationship, as we say locally, sometimes children they play games between parents, and it's all about control. So they may say, well, at mommy's house, I get to do what I want. Or at daddy's house, I get to eat junk food. This is normal. But what's important is if, for example, a child starts bad talking the other parent, it's always in the parent's interest to ensure that that child has a good relationship with the other parent. Because again, if these things are left unchecked, it can snowball with time.
In your experience,
So,
Ms.
in the
Laka.
Canadian cases, they also indicated that in children from the ages of 10 to 12 of age, these are, I think, a prime category, but generally it is recognized that the older the child is, the more weight should be given to that child's expressed wishes. But if there has been a finding of alienation, then little weight should be attached to the child's wishes. So what that means is this. You have younger children, they are easier to manipulate. So on the whole, with younger children under 10 or under 8, a court may put very little weight on what their views are if they say, I don't want to see mommy. The court would also look at the other allegations as to what is in the best interest of the child. But when you have older children, 14, 15, 16, a court may listen to their views a lot more in determining what is in their interest. So if they say, I don't want to see mommy or daddy on weekends, or I want to see them one weekend for the month, some weight would be placed on that. However, if that child is interviewed and they found that that child has been subjected to alienation, very little weight will be placed on the child's view because he has been manipulated to have this view. So there were 4 things that were recommended by Dr. Fielder in Canada, which our courts adopted in this particular case. And I found that it was easy to understand. One is, when a finding of parental alienation is made, what can the court do with the one? Do nothing and leave the child with the alienating parent. So if the child is perhaps far gone and you really can't help the child, or there may be more damage done to the child in trying to assist that child to bridge that gap with the other parent, they may just leave that child permanently with the parent who is the favored parent, as they call them.
Right.
The second thing a court can do, which has been done in our local courts in recent times, is do a custody reversal by placing the child with the rejected parent. So what that means is a child, for example, hasn't seen daddy in a year or barely sees him, has indicated, I don't want to have a relationship with him. Sometimes, and of course it depends on the facts and it depends on the recommendations made by psychologists and by social workers, the court will say, well, you know what, you go live with daddy for like a week and then come and live with mommy, and let's see if you kind of even out with time in terms of your view and how you treat with both parents. The third option, which is also exercised by our courts quite regularly, I would say, is, leave the child with the favored parent and provide therapy. So in many instances, what I found in practice is that the court will immediately send this child to therapy. So he meets both parents and they sort of try to find a way to assist the child to bridge that gap. And during that period, they stay with the favored parent. Again, it depends on the facts. And the fourth option is provide a transitional placement where the child is placed with a neutral party. And therapy is provided so that eventually the child will be placed with the rejected parent. And that may be a little bit more extreme. And perhaps if there's a case where the child is being abused, and it may not be in his interest to be with the favored parent, but the child at the same time doesn't want to stay with the rejected parent, they may say, well, okay, stay with granny for a while and do some therapy and then see if you can stay with the rejected parent. It's a little bit, I would say, it's one that I've never had a case with where such an order was made. Usually an order would be made for therapy. And in very rare cases where I would say there's a constant there's constant malicious behavior by the favored parent, in such instances, there may be a custody reversal in those cases.
Well, I had an opportunity to deal with a client, and in this particular instance, this client felt as though this client's rejected parent, is the term you utilize, so the rejected parent would have filed a complaint on the favored parent, that the favored parent was abusing the child, right? And the matter had to go to court and so on and that sort of thing. And the rejected parent's claim was that the preferred parent was abusive, right? Of course, they had an acrimonious relationship and it ended. And what we had was, in this instance, was the child coming, when the rejected parent was not around, coming to say, yes, they don't like being disciplined by the preferred parent. But when the other parent was present, the preferred parent was present, they would say, you know what, no, mommy tells a lot of stories and mommy is creative and mommy just doesn't want me to be with daddy. And so this particular child was actually trying to appease both parents. So they were so it was confusing as to which parent was the rejected parent and which parent was the accepted parent, because the child was trying to appease both. Was trying to appease the mother and the father.
In these cases in the beginning. Like if the complaint is made early, children, they tend to please, as you rightly said, both parents, or they would not want to be in conflict with either. So they tend to become manipulative, I have to say, over time, because they would eventually start saying what the parent wants to hear. And they may not express exactly how they feel on the inside.
But we call that
and
borrowed
then over
scenarios,
time,
by
of
the way.
course,
Borrowed
if
scenarios.
parental alienation is left unchecked for a long period, well, then they really wouldn't care what the rejected parent says, or they would not really care to appease that person if they become comfortable on a long-term basis with the favored parent. And I'm saying this from the perspective of an attorney, not as a psychologist.
So what would be your advice? Because we're looking to wrap up. What would be your advice to families, parents, persons who are in this current situation, and what would be your advice to them? How do they treat with this?
A parent who is experiencing parental alienation for their child or children should treat with it immediately. They should not leave it unchecked. They should get a good attorney and file the appropriate applications in court to ensure that there are orders in place to protect the child and to protect that relationship they have as a parent with that child. That's one. And two, to the parent who is the favored one, long term, there's actually more damage psychologically created to the child, because you create a child who is not balanced. You literally subject your child to psychological abuse over time, and they sometimes take it into other relationships when they become adults. So it's really not in the best interest of the child. It's always best for children to have a good relationship with both parents.
All right.
These are my views.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lackner, for sharing. Is there a website or a page somewhere that persons who are undergoing such issues can reach out to on social media or anything like that?
Yeah, so I'm attached to the Parental Alienation Network. It's called the PAIN Network. It's PAIN really stands for Parental Alienation Awareness International Network. So you can find it on Facebook. And if a person is being alienated, that network is a nonprofit org. I'm an ambassador legal attached to that network, and they really assign persons to assist people pro bono who's experiencing parental alienation.
All right. So thank you very much. So that's PAIN on social media. Persons can, I'm guessing, can check Instagram, Facebook, that sort of thing.
IG, yeah.
Right. Thank you very much for your time and the expertise and information. We really do appreciate it. For those people at home who feel as though maybe you're not sure, but you feel as though you might be in this position, you feel as though some of what we talked about today may speak to you and your situation, please know that you are not alone. You are cherished, you are cared about, and you are loved, and there are people you can reach out to seek assistance. Of course, there's always yours truly, your counseling psychologist, Sule A. Joseph, and of course, PAIN, who you can reach out to on social media. All right, and so until next week, please God, same time, same place, stay psyched. See you guys later.